There's a story that's over 2,000 years old, and somehow it describes exactly what's holding you back right now. Not in a vague spiritual way. It maps directly onto the psychologies of why some people grow, build, and create extraordinary lives, while others stay stuck, safe, and quietly miserable. This video is about the parable of the talents, and if you've heard of it before, I want you to set aside whatever you think you know, because we're going to go much deeper than the Sunday school version. We're going to look at what modern neuroscience and psychology actually say about the behaviors this story describes. And when you see it through that lens, it stops being an ancient religious text and starts feeling like someone wrote it specifically about your life. Here's the quick version of the parable for context. The parable of the talents comes from the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus is speaking privately to his disciples about responsibility, stewardship, and what it means to live faithfully while waiting for the master's return. A master leaves on a journey and gives 3 servants money. These were called talents, which were a unit of currency. One gets 5, one gets 2, and the last one gets 1. The first 2 go out, take risks, invest, and double what they were given. The third one digs a hole and buries his talent to keep it safe. When the master returns, he praises the first 2 and gives them even more. But the third one, he gets everything taken away. The master doesn't just ignore him, he's genuinely angry. And the servant's explanation is heartbreaking when you really hear it. He says, "I was afraid, so he did nothing." Now here's what most people miss. This parable isn't really about money or even effort in the traditional sense. It's about what happens inside a human being when they choose safety over growth and the price they pay for that choice. So let's break this down through the lens of what we actually know about the brain, behavior, and human potential, because this is where it really gets interesting. The second most important thing this story reveals is something psychologists call loss aversion, and it's one of the most powerful forces in the human brain. Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize winner and one of the most important thinkers of the last 50 years, found that the pain of losing something feels roughly twice as intense as the pleasure of gaining the same thing. So your brain is literally wired to protect what you have more than it's wired to pursue what you could have. That's not a character flaw, that's biology. And that's exactly what the third servant is doing. He's not lazy and he's not stupid. He's running a perfectly rational risk calculation in his head and coming to the conclusion that the safest move is to hold on tight and give back exactly what he was given. No loss, no risk, no failure. Sounds reasonable, right? But here's where neuroscience blows this wide open. When you consistently choose the safe path to avoid loss, you're not actually staying neutral. Your brain doesn't work like that. Every time you suppress a decision, avoid a risk, or choose comfort over growth, you're strengthening a neural pathway that makes it easier to do the same thing next time. Neuroscientists call this Hebbian learning, and you might have heard of it. Neurons that fire together, wire together. So the third servant isn't just burying his talent once, he's training his brain to bury things. He's building a mental architecture designed for avoidance. And over time, that architecture becomes his identity. That's important, but if you don't also understand what's happening on the other side of the equation, you're only seeing half the picture. Because look at what the first 2 servants are doing. They go out immediately. They don't wait for perfect conditions. They don't ask for more information. They don't hedge. They simply move. And this is where the neuroscience of growth mindset comes in. Dweck's research at Stanford showed that people who believe their abilities can grow through effort literally have different brain activity when they encounter challenges. Their brains light up with curiosity and engagement. People with a fixed mindset, their brains light up with threat response. Same challenge, but completely different internal experience. The first 2 servants have what Dweck would call a growth orientation. They see their 5 talents and 2 talents not as a possession to protect, but as a starting point to build from. And the moment they start taking action, their brains start releasing dopamine, not just from the reward of success, but from the act of pursuing a goal itself. This is a huge insight. Your brain rewards the pursuit, not just the outcome. So people who take action feel better during the process, which makes them more likely to keep going, which produces better results, which reinforces the belief that taking action is worth it. It's a loop, a beautiful, compounding loop. The third servant never starts that loop. And because he never starts it, he never feels it. And because he never feels it, he concludes that playing it safe was the right call. He doesn't realize he's been living in a self-fulfilling prophecy the entire time. Now, here's the most important thing the story is showing us. And this is the part that I think most people have never considered. The master's reaction at the end isn't just judgment. It's a description of a law, a real, observable psychological law. He says something that sounds almost cruel on the surface. To everyone who has, more will be given. But from the one who has nothing, even what he has will be taken away. That sounds unfair until you realize it's not a moral statement. It's a description of how growth actually works. Psychologists and neuroscientists today call this the Matthew effect. The rich get richer, not just financially, but cognitively, emotionally, and socially. When you develop a skill, you build the neural infrastructure to develop it further. When you build confidence through action, that confidence makes the next action easier. And when you create connections and relationships, those connections open doors to more connections. Growth compounds, and so does stagnation. When you stop using a skill, those neural pathways weaken. Neuroscientists call this synaptic pruning. Your brain literally removes the infrastructure for things you're not using. So the talent that was buried didn't just sit there waiting, it atrophied. It got taken away not by the master, but by the servant's own inaction. This is the cost of playing it safe that nobody talks about. It's not that you stay the same, you actually go backwards. The world keeps moving, keeps compounding, and keeps building. And if you're not growing with it, you're falling behind relative to it. The servant thought he was being responsible by not losing the talent, but by not growing it, he lost it anyway. He just lost it more slowly, more quietly, and without ever knowing it was happening. That's the real parable. That's what this story has been trying to tell us for 2,000 years. So what do you do with this? Because this isn't just an interesting intellectual exercise. This has to change something in how you operate. And here's where it gets practical. The first thing you have to do is identify where in your life you're bearing talents. And I don't mean this metaphorically. I mean, get specific. Where are you holding back? Where do you have a skill, an idea, a relationship, an opportunity, and instead of investing it, you're protecting it? Maybe it's a business idea you've been sitting on because you're afraid it won't work. Maybe it's a creative project you've been putting off because you're not sure it's good enough. Maybe it's a conversation you need to have, but you keep avoiding because it might go badly. That's the buried talent. And every day you leave it buried, those neural pathways are weakening. The window isn't staying open, it's closing. The second thing, and this is where Tony Robbins' work and modern psychology completely align, you have to change the emotional association you have with risk. Most people feel fear when they think about taking action on something uncertain. And that's normal. But high performers don't feel less fear. They've just rewired what fear means to them. They've trained themselves to interpret that nervous, uncertain feeling as a signal that something important is happening, not as a stop sign, but as a green light. And you can do that consciously. Every time you feel that resistance before doing something that matters, instead of pulling back, you can say to yourself, this feeling means I'm close to something real. And then you move anyway. That rewiring doesn't happen overnight, but it starts the moment you decide to do it differently once. The third thing, and this is what separates people who understand this intellectually from people who actually live it, is that you have to start before you're ready. The first two servants didn't wait for the master to come back and give them instructions. They went immediately. They operated on incomplete information with imperfect conditions, and they moved anyway. Because the brain doesn't build confidence through thinking. It builds confidence through doing. Every time you act in the face of uncertainty, you're depositing into a neurological account that pays compound interest in the form of courage, capability, and self-trust. The servant who buried his talent was waiting for certainty that was never going to come. And that's the trap. Certainty is the enemy of growth because certainty only exists in the past. The future is always uncertain, always risky, always asking you to bet on yourself with incomplete information. The people who win are the ones who get comfortable making that bet. If this idea resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. What's one area of your life where you've been choosing safety over growth? I read every comment because I'm genuinely interested in the patterns people notice in their own lives. And if exploring human behavior through ancient wisdom is something you're interested in, consider subscribing. Each week, we take a timeless teaching, uncover the deeper ideas behind it, and connect it to modern psychology, neuroscience, and the challenges we still face today. Because these stories aren't just about people who lived thousands of years ago. They're about us. So let's bring it all together. 2,000 years ago, Jesus told a story about 3 servants and a master. And on the surface, it looks like a lesson about money or work ethic. But what it's actually describing is the neuroscience of growth versus stagnation, the psychology of loss aversion, the compounding nature of action and inaction, and the very real, very measurable cost of choosing safety over potential. The 3rd servant didn't lose because he failed. He lost because he never tried. He let fear make the decision for him, and then he spent his whole life defending that decision instead of questioning it. His greatest mistake wasn't bearing the talent. It was believing that bearing it was the smart move. You came into this video with a 2,000-year-old story. You're leaving with a framework for understanding your own behavior at a neurological level. The fear is real. The loss aversion is real. The pull towards safety is real. But so is the compounding power of action. So is the dopamine loop of pursuit. And so is the fact that your brain can be rewired, not someday and not after you have more information or better conditions or even more confidence, but right now with the next decision that you make. The talent is in your hands. What you do with it next is entirely up to you.